do, Rockfin. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Grayzone. We're live again. It's another Friday, and I'm here with award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate. How you doing, Aaron?
I am well, Max, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And sorry we're a little late, but we're less late than normal. And to reward us for being less late than normal, we'd appreciate if you could like this stream and share it so that more people could see it. That's my request.
Yeah. Like and share. And, the reason to do that is we are just traditionally suppressed by the Google-owned algorithm on YouTube. And we also recently were suppressed by a t-shirt sales shop for the first time. We're banned by Redbubble. I'll show you the design. Many of you have purchased this design, and we're trying to find another place to retail it, but Redbubble banned our Nordstrom design. They just said it was inappropriate content. What we're doing is protesting a terror attack and mocking the cover up. This is the design that Redbubble did. Redbubble's like the ethically sourced place. I wanted to go there because they're not like using sweatshop labor, and I thought they would be tolerant of some anti-war imagery like this, but they weren't having it. So another reason to like the stream. And when we have this up at another retailer, we'll let you know. And thank you to Panelist Media for this design, Paul Ahern. Beautiful.
And what is their objection to this image of Biden licking an ice cream cone?
Well, it's based on the Unabomber, the image of the Unabomber, who I've said before was a much more cogent critic of technocratic society than Joe Biden. And I wonder, was there any U.S. government input to Redbubble? Because this t-shirt was, our design was doing well. People were buying like mouse pads and dog mats, t-shirts, hoodies, all kinds of stuff. I guess, I don't know if they want to see this circulating. They definitely don't want a reporter asking Biden, are you the Nordstrom bomber? But so far, none have done so. And Biden's pretty hard to reach if you're a reporter anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so, I hope that design finds another home because I haven't gotten mine yet. And I was excited to wear it. So
did you order one?
I didn't order. So if you try to order one right now, that store won't let you order it?
No, that you can order like Grayzone gear there, but you can't order that.
Wow.
So
if you did manage to get a hold of that Grayzone merch, you're in possession of a hot commodity.
Oh yeah. It's selling for a lot on eBay now. So I don't know. That's just our latest censorship campaign targeting us. But there's so much to talk about today. I don't want to waste too much time. There are too many good topics to choose from. And we're going to talk about the Mehdi Hasan smear campaign against Matt Taibbi over the Twitter files. I mean, the Twitter files obviously did a lot of damage, and now we're seeing I think this is, a Biden directed campaign, and they're running it through MSNBC, but we'll talk about that and go into Mehdi Hasan's rich history of making stuff up in a second. But I thought, it was important. I've been wanting to talk about Israel-Palestine for weeks now. So much has been happening there. And things finally flared up and came to a head, as could have been predicted in the month of April, Aaron. I don't know. I don't think this is going to lead to a war. That's what the Israeli security services are saying, that they're not planning to let this turn into a war. But there are figures inside the building, inside Israel's military intelligence and security apparatus, who are not thinking rationally. They're thinking messianically. They're thinking in terms of Jewish fundamentalism, and they are determined to take things to the brink. And we have seen retaliation not only by the factions in the Gaza Strip that have been retaliating whenever there is settler violence and violations in Jerusalem, but in Lebanon as well, which is something we haven't seen in years. I don't know if you have any thoughts going into this, Aaron.
No, I just can't believe that this has been going on for so long, and it's the same pattern every single time, and the same dishonest way the media reports it in the West. It's framed as clashes. It's a religious conflict between sides. It's presented as if there's parity in this conflict when we're talking about a occupying power that is founded on ethnic cleansing and is perpetuating that ethnic cleansing. And yet, despite all the progress we've seen in the minds of average civilians, if you look at polls, people are much more sympathetic to Palestinians than they used to be. That hasn't permeated our media infrastructure, where it's just still the party line.
Well, let's set the scene a little bit. I mean, most of our viewers know there is the most right-wing or religiously extreme coalition in power in Israel, with members of the Otzma Yehudit, or Jewish Power Party, who are acolytes of the fanatical hate preacher Rabbi Meir Kahane, the late hate preacher Meir Kahane, in Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition. So Netanyahu is previously seen as kind of an extreme figure, is actually the moderate in this coalition holding things together. And these are figures who want to invade the Al-Aqsa compound and usher in a third Jewish temple in order to bring about the messianic redemption of the land of Israel. These are some of the most dangerous and fanatical figures that have ever been in an Israeli governing coalition, which in some ways lifts the mask on what Zionism has always been. But we'll get into that. Let's just set the scene with what happened on April 4th and April 5th at the Al-Aqsa, inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, when Israeli security forces violated the status quo. I'll explain the status quo in a second, but let's just see some video of what took place. I mean, these are Israeli forces, Palestinian worshipers with rifle butts on the night of April 4th, on Tuesday night. And they are trying to force them out. Here's Israeli forces beating Palestinian men as they attempted to leave the mosque. It's sort of like a ritual beating. Those are the Magav, the border police, who patrol East Jerusalem, the occupied East Jerusalem in the Old City. And you can see here that this is Issa Amro from Hebron, noting that the Israeli police used numbers to identify the detained worshipers from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, those they arrested that night. And then the following day, this is probably April 5th. Yeah, this is April 5th. Where'd they get that idea for numbers from? Previously, during the Second Intifada, Israeli occupation forces had written numbers on the arms of men it arrested in occupied cities. And this became a big scandal in Israel because, of course, Jews had numbers tattooed on their arms in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. But we can see this practice returning. So it's kind of like never again, but conditions apply. What was going on there? What was taking place? Well, this started on midnight, so late Tuesday night. Let's step back actually a little bit. It's Passover. My family just celebrated Passover, and it's also Ramadan. It's the Ramadan season, and the weather is heating up in Israel, Palestine. It's protest season. It's the season when fighting and wars and clashes usually take place. Ramadan is a very emotional time. People grow closer to their community. And if your community is surrounded by troops, then you may actually be blockaded in for Passover. And the Passover holiday, as celebrated by fundamentalist elements in Israel, is extremely ethnocentric. In each generation, a new foe has risen up to destroy us. It culminates with the killing of the Gentile firstborn. And I have seen this explicitly invoked by state-backed Israeli religious nationalist rabbis to justify the killing of Palestinians. Some would say it's a perversion of Judaism, but that's their ethnocentric or ethno-fascist interpretation. So everyone was predicting violence, and everyone was predicting that the violence would take place around the Al-Aqsa compound, which for these fundamentalists is the site of the future third Jewish temple. So Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Israeli forces came in to Al-Aqsa Mosque. They broke in and they were trying to remove Palestinian worshipers who had stayed after evening prayers for itikaf, which is, night prayers, but it's also a form of resistance because they knew that these fanatical settlers were going to raid the compound the following day and conduct Jewish prayer in violation of the status quo. The status quo means the regime that had been put into place to keep the peace around the old city after 1967, where the Islamic Waqf, which is maintained by Jordan, oversees the Al-Aqsa compound, and then Israel and its security forces get to control the Western Wall, where Jewish worship takes place. But these fanatical settlers, they don't want to just worship at the Western Wall, and they don't actually believe in Jewish prayer per se. Their idea of sanctifying God is through the mass sacrifice of goats and sheep. And what they've been seeking to do is smuggle sheep into the Al-Aqsa compound. They've even offered $5,000 bounties to take sheep into the Al-Aqsa compound or goats and sacrifice them. And so you have this taking place. Then the Israeli forces come in to forcibly remove Palestinian worshipers who are staying there overnight and also trying to prevent it. It leads to these scenes of beating. And the provocation has led to a response in the form of rockets from Lebanon first, which is the first time we've seen rockets actually target the northern colonies of Israel. Here's a look at those rockets. And they did serious damage. I mean, the Iron Dome didn't work here. This is the Iron Dome that we're subsidizing, by the way, as U.S. taxpayers.
הייתי מקודם ליד מרכז מסחרי קטן, שגם בשלומי נפגע פגיעה ישירה, ובנס אף אחד לא נפגע שם.
So this is serious.
בינתיים אני מכיר רק
It's
פגיעה
serious when rockets come in from Lebanon for the first time
מרסיסים.
since 2006. And most of you watching will remember that 2006 was the time that Israel suffered a bloody nose. It was effectively beaten out of southern Lebanon by Hezbollah, the main resistance faction in Shia resistance faction based in Beirut and southern Lebanon. So what Hezbollah is sending the message here: if you respond, we will respond even more strongly, and you do not want that, because we can hit Haifa, we can hit your northern cities and blanket them in rockets, Katyushas, and maybe more. All of this happened because of these settler fanatics. Remember, 2014, settler fanatics triggered the devastating war between Israel and the factions of the Gaza Strip after they kidnapped and murdered a 15-year-old boy in occupied East Jerusalem, Mohammed Abu Qadir, pouring gasoline down his throat and setting him on fire. Then 2021, same thing. Settler fanatics attempting to take over Palestinian homes in the occupied East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah triggered response from the factions in the Gaza Strip, who took it upon themselves to protect those families in East Jerusalem and declare that we are not separate here in the Gaza Strip. There were also incursions into the Temple Mount. And then we have this current situation where this extreme government is in power, but it's not just an extreme government. It's fanatics like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are actually in charge of Israeli police, Israeli security factions, and who are followers of this temple movement, which seeks to destroy the Al-Aqsa compound and replace it with a third Jewish temple. And back in January, Itamar Ben-Gvir, if you don't know who he is, he was like the lawyer for the most fanatical, violent settlers for years and has risen to power through this coalition. He actually went to the Al-Aqsa compound in a flagrant provocation aimed at provoking violence. Hamas called this a potential detonator of violence in the region. And you can see who's around Itamar Ben-Gvir right now. This guy is the security minister in charge of his own private army. He's surrounded by the Israeli police as he enters the third holiest site in Islam. Now, there's another.
And Max, this is basically like the playbook, right? They do this every time, or whenever they want to trigger a round of violence. I mean, Ariel Sharon did the same thing back in 2000, right?
Okay, so Sharon brought.
They must have this in some playbook that they just dust off every time they want to have an excuse to bomb Gaza and raid the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, Sharon triggered the Second Intifada deliberately because he knew that it would advance his own plans, which he eventually got through the Gaza disengagement. Back in 2000, he ascended to the Al-Aqsa compound, caused violence in the old city that spun completely out of control. Israel then fired 1 million bullets against Palestinians in the month of October 2000 as part of their push strategy to cause Palestinian violence. There had been no suicide bombings by that point. Yeah. And then the bombings followed. Yes. So, but Sharon, however, was secular. This is a religious figure who has called this month for riots and invasions of the Al-Aqsa compound, and who is linked to a movement that began many, many decades ago, gained strength through the 1967 occupation of the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, where these holy sites were opened. But in the 1980s, you saw a mentor of Itamar Ben-Gvir, Yisrael Ariel, start the Jewish underground to actually bomb the Al-Aqsa compound, to blow it up, to give way to the Third Jewish Temple. In 1996, the Yesha Council of Settler Rabbis issued their version of a fatwa, basically declaring that the Orthodox Jewish understanding of the Al-Aqsa compound, which is that Jewish prayer is forbidden unless Jews are first purified by water mixed with the ashes of a red heifer, is null and void, and that Jews should just go up there and start praying. It was at that same time that one of these figures from the Yesha Council, Dov Lior, declared then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin a din rodef, or a pursuer of Jews. And when you're declared a din rodef, a Jewish fundamentalist has an obligation to kill you. And so one of Lior's followers killed Rabin. Why? Because the Oslo Accords were seen as an obstruction to the seizure of the entire land of Israel, which would have provided the basis for messianic redemption. So Rabin had to be killed. So then we moved to 2000, as you pointed out, Ariel Sharon going there, triggering violence. And then we moved to the present day as this temple movement gained strength with Israeli state support, and one of its key figures gaining control of the police, and through a deal recently cut with Netanyahu, his own private militia of 2,000 hooligans in police uniform.
So Itamar Ben-Gvir, this fanatic, gets his own, how does that work? He gets his own private militia, like to do what?
To crack down on protests inside Israel, to attack Palestinian citizens of Israel. Basically, the deal was cut because Ben-Gvir had first convinced Netanyahu to carry out judicial reforms, which would have given the settlers more power and supposedly democratized the judiciary, which led to these massive protests that we've been seeing in Israel against Netanyahu among the liberal population that believes in the Supreme Court. And so that's putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. So first, to relieve the pressure from his right, Netanyahu says, we're going to suspend the judicial reforms, and I will give you, Ben-Gvir, and your people, your own private militia, if you just stop pushing on the courts.
Right.
And then, to relieve the pressure from his left, Netanyahu has the opportunity to send the police in to beat the hell out of Palestinian worshipers, knowing that it will trigger violence. And that violence, the rockets, the news cycle, it will overwhelm the protests, and people will start to kind of more come together as a society, because now the Negev or Nakab region in Israel's south is under rocket fire from Gaza, and the northern colonies have been hit with rockets too. People are going into bomb shelters. It's the perfect situation for Netanyahu. But the most clownish, fanatical figures are in charge of Israel's security forces, and they, in many ways, hold the reins and are deciding where things are going. And then you have Hezbollah deciding, you're afraid of us. You will not strike us back in any meaningful way unless you want to trigger a regional war. And so we're going to demonstrate deterrence. And they did so. What was Israel's response in Lebanon? They hit some open spaces, like some farms. They didn't want to get things going with Hezbollah.
So that's interesting. So Israel will obviously keep bombing Gaza because Gaza is relatively defenseless. It's an open air prison. But you're saying that in Lebanon, Israel does not want that fight right now.
Well, even in Gaza, it's important to note that Israel did the same thing, which they often do, where they bomb what they call Hamas training sites, which are open fields, and these training sites frequently change. They didn't want to escalate with the factions in Gaza because we saw in 2021, those factions were able to actually arrange rocket set pieces over Tel Aviv to actually strike targets more accurately and more far away from Gaza than they ever had before, and cause serious disruptions and destabilization inside Israeli society. So Netanyahu is trying, along with his security chiefs, are trying to prevent things from falling apart as far as the security situation is concerned. But the politics of Israel have been destabilized internally. So Netanyahu's besieged on all sides. He recently dismissed his defense chief, which led to or intensified all of these military reservists, particularly those aligned with the liberal or centrist secular factions of the Ashkenazi elite in Israel. You know, the people you see out protesting in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, military reservists refusing to perform duties. Who are these military reservists? They're led by Air Force officers. The Air Force officers are like the cream of the crop of Israeli society. They're the most educated. They tend to be, white and tend to come from the liberal parts of society. And they're also the ones who carry out the bombings of Gaza that leave entire families massacred. And they refuse to perform duty. Why? Because they oppose this far-right government and the attack by Netanyahu on his own security chiefs because they won't go along with the legal reforms. So you can see how complicated this is getting for Netanyahu and how unstable it is. But then, you have so much of the population supporting people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, turning away not only from the kind of status quo that's prevailed legally or politically, but from the Orthodox Jewish status quo to a pure ethno-fascism, a pure Jewish supremacism, because what they have grown up in is nothing but military service, years and years of conflict and propaganda against Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in general. So it's a tinderbox right now. It could go anywhere, but Netanyahu, it's just so ironic to say it, but Netanyahu is the one who's trying to prevent an escalation. I think Israel's totally lost control.
I don't know if you saw this, Max, but recently they had this envoy, this global envoy to combat anti-Semitism. And she recently was forced to step down because I think she mildly criticized the judicial reforms or something.
Yeah.
And she's a person who goes around calling everyone anti-Semitic if they dare to criticize Israel.
Right.
And even she was forced out because I think she voiced some sort of tepid support for the protests or something.
Yeah, her name is Noah Tishby. Yeah. And she's sort of like an actress and a model who was put up there to denounce everyone as an anti-Semite because she's essentially telegenic, and they needed her to do that job, to just this fake job of labeling every criticism of Israel a form of anti-Semitism. And here's a good reply to Noah Tishby resigning from Rachel Roberts, who is an anti-Zionist Jewish activist. Here's Noah Tishby's resignation. It's with disappointment and sadness that I can confirm that the current Israeli government has dismissed me, blah, blah, blah. And she said, at some point you'll realize that no matter how much eye makeup, how high you hike your skirt, or how much you flirt with talk show hosts, the cause you work for is unjust and the people you work for are racist scum. I don't know if Noah Tishby will realize that, just like I don't believe that the protesters in Israel proper will realize that what they are protesting for is just another more enlightened form of racist ethnocentric Zionism. They just essentially want the mask put back on their system. They're not protesting against the brutalization of Palestinians at Al-Aqsa. They just don't want these fanatical clowns running their country. And here's a really illustrative video of Israeli protesters begging AIPAC to save them from Netanyahu.
Everybody out there, we're heading for dark times. AIPAC, we need you. We need you with us. AIPAC, you've supported Israel through all our wars. This is a war for Israel's future.
We are in a critical moment now. It's about time that Howard Kohl will raise his voice, not just behind the screen, because we're on the edge.
We ask of the representatives from AIPAC here today to tell our Prime Minister that they believe Israel should stay a strong democracy as it is today. You cannot be quiet.
So dramatic.
Please help us.
What do they want AIPAC to do?
Let's do it together.
What the hell? Oh, the Handmaiden's Tale. That's like the thing that liberals do under Trump. They do the Handmaiden's Tale. Well, they want AIPAC to speak up against Netanyahu and all of the anti-democratic measures. But what is AIPAC? But the apartheid lobby that supports every brutal war.
Yeah,
provides the perfect. I mean, without AIPAC, there would be no funding for the occupation. AIPAC is the oil that greases the wheels of the occupation and apartheid machine. And so that shows you the contradictions of these liberal Zionist protests, which preceded all of this violence. And I think inflamed it in a lot of ways because Netanyahu needed something to get him out of that. I mean, he was getting criticized lightly even by the Biden administration. There are some rumors that this was sort of a Biden color revolution to get Netanyahu out. I didn't really see enough evidence to support that.
And Max, let me ask you, what's up with the Palestinian Authority? They're still ruled by Abbas, who's in his 80s. I don't even know what he does anymore. But what is the role that they're playing in acting still as the subcontractors for the occupation? And is there any movement for any kind of change among Palestinians in their leadership in the West Bank? Because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the Palestinian Authority is a serious roadblock to any kind of actual resistance.
Yeah, there was a summit in Aqaba with Abbas and the PA and many of their so-called partners who are basically the patrons keeping this Vichy regime alive in the West Bank. And it was really a means of pumping formaldehyde into the corpse of the PA. The PA still active, however, and they have control of the security apparatus in the West Bank, which means that while Abbas constantly and his people constantly say they're suspending security collaboration with the Israeli army, they never fully do so because it would mean unleashing another intifada or chaos. However, their control of the security apparatus has never been weaker, and the control or influence of the traditional resistance factions, whether it's Fatah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or Hamas, over the minds of Palestinian youth in the West Bank has never been weaker. And that's why we've seen the rise of this element called the Lion's Den, which is essentially an informal grouping of young men who simply want to fight Israeli forces inside their own cities and prevent armed incursions. They represent no faction deliberately, and it's gained popularity all across any occupied area, to the point where we're seeing more armed resistance against Israeli forces in the West Bank than at any time since the end of the Second Intifada, which effectively ended in the Balata refugee camp with a fight between the Palestinian Authority and the last vestiges of Palestinian resistance factions. And now we're seeing again in Balata's in Nablus, we're seeing Palestinian resistance forces, particularly grouped in Nablus, fighting Israeli soldiers directly. They're taking lots of bodies. That's why when you hear about all of these Israeli raids, or we saw recently a death squad roll up in Jenin in an unmarked car with masked men actually shoot people in the street. That's because the Lion's Den is frightening Israel's security chiefs so much. Their nightmare is that armed resistance takes over the West Bank and overwhelms the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority is kind of the last thing standing between that and just all against all.
And and just as you're talking, I'm thinking, so what are Palestinians supposed to do? Right now is the anniversary of the Great March of Return. It kicked off in late March of 2018, I think. And what was that? That was when tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza go out marching simply for the right to live in freedom against this Israeli blockade, against an Israeli government that stole all their land, which is why so many millions of Palestinians live in Gaza, is because they and their families are refugees. And what happened to them? They were just gunned down by Israeli soldiers using U.S.-made weapons, and the whole world just shrugged. Just shrugged. And so even when there's mass organized nonviolent resistance, Palestinians get gunned down and the world doesn't care. So
I mean, I remember Thomas Friedman would always write this column whenever anything would happen in Palestine, like any resistance would take place, armed resistance. He would say, why don't Palestinians just get together and walk towards the walls that they're confined in, and then liberals and the good people will meet them on the other side and say, hey, they're trying nonviolence, and we will let them in, and then we're all just gonna like hold hands and sing kumbaya. And then when they did it, they decided to do it, and they were all, I mean, and they've been doing it, actually smaller events like this in Gaza for years, and then they were all just shot in the knees by snipers. I mean, this is kind of what it looked like when a teen was killed in 2019. Okay, here he ran to the wall with nothing. These are like I've passed through these walls. These are walls separate that just keep them in a literal open air prison. There are actually remote controlled machine guns on top of those walls, which allow a unit which is dozens of kilometers away to shoot people by remote control when they walk up to the walls. But then there are snipers perched there, and they would just shoot these guys. Because why? They have to keep them out of Israel because they are not Jewish. That's the only reason. 80% of these people are the descendants of refugees who were forced from their lands and their homes in 1948 in order to form a Jewish state that would maintain a Jewish demographic majority. And so basically Gaza is a warehouse, a walled-in warehouse for surplus humanity that can't come back to Israel because it will upset the demographic majority they need to maintain, which is the essence of racism. And so these are the youth being shot in the knees for trying to walk into the first world from their open air prison. So what are they supposed to do? You raise a great question. What are they supposed to do? They've called for BDS. They've called for nonviolent boycotts. Israel declares that anti-Semitism and wages war on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. It shoots protesters. I've seen protesters get shot in the West Bank for nonviolently protesting the walls being built through their farms. So what are they supposed to do? Well, we learn on Passover that the sword comes into the world when justice is delayed and justice is denied. And that's what is taking place right here when we see armed resistance against this occupation. I don't know if there's anything else to say, but what would Americans do? What would American farmers do? What would Republican red armed men in the rural areas do if a foreign army came and took their lands. It would be like Red Dawn. That's kind of the plot of Red Dawn. And that's what Palestinians are living through and have been living through for decades and decades. And just one more quick note, Aaron. The Biden administration has blocked a UN resolution to condemn Israel's violence at the Al-Aqsa compound and demand and to call for an update on the situation. And this takes place as the Biden State Department simultaneously denounces peace talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which are being brokered by China. So it's clear what the Biden administration is seeking to do, the same as the Trump administration, to give Israel carte blanche to rampage through the neighborhood. And what these peace talks are doing is removing Saudi Arabia as a coalition partner in the regional war that Israel wanted to wage against Iran, something that humanity should be happy about, but the Biden administration is not.
Yes, Saudi Arabia just basically announced that it's suspending its war on Yemen. And so peace is breaking out. And there was a report in the Wall Street Journal this week that the director of the CIA, William Burns, flew over to Saudi Arabia and, quote, expressed frustration, unquote, with Saudi Arabia because they've made peace deals with Iran and also are talking about a peace deal with Syria. And they did so in talks brokered by Russia and China. So the CIA is outraged, very frustrated at peace breaking out in areas that it wants to control.
Yeah, here it is. I said the State Department, but it's actually the CIA director, which is more critical if you think about CIA collaboration with Saudi Arabia and what it means and what kind of threats he could have meted out. But CIA complained U.S. was blindsided by Saudi outreach to Syria and Iran. So, yeah, it also means that they're concerned that that Syrian civilians won't be starved into oblivion anymore as Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, restores relations with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and other regional partners. And here's the Wall Street Journal article. In the weeks since it was announced, Saudi Arabia has also neared an agreement to restore diplomatic ties with Syria. These negotiations were mediated by Russia. Damn, Russia's brokering peace. It's terrible. Leaving the U.S. on the sidelines of another major development in the Middle East. In an unannounced visit to Saudi Arabia early this week, CIA Director Burns expressed frustration with the Saudis. He told Mohammed bin Salman that the U.S. felt blindsided by Riyadh's rapprochement with Iran and Syria, countries that remain heavily sanctioned by the West under the auspices of Washington's global rivals. So Burns, I mean, first of all, Burns wanted the CIA, and Burns knew him. They wanted Prince Nayef in because Prince Nayef had always been the pal of the CIA. He was the longtime security director for Saudi Arabia, and he was wounded by an Al-Qaeda attack decades ago. And supposedly, as the story goes, it led him into kind of addiction to painkillers and maybe other drugs, and he was left sort of incapacitated. And then that allowed bin Salman to kind of work his way in as crown prince and de facto leader, as King Abdullah was kind of senile. And then you have the whole Khashoggi thing take place. I mean, so many things that happened in the past, I'm seeing in a different light now, like the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. He was on his way to a peace summit with Iran in Iraq, with Saudi Arabia when he was killed. So the U.S. was trying to prevent that.
Yeah.
And then the whole Khashoggi thing, I see it in a different light.
Yeah. What's funny about William Burns getting so mad at these peace talks is that his memoir is called The Back Channel, which is all about his skill at, back channeling and having deals on the side, even with our enemies, and what an important thing that is. So here are some back channels taking place outside of U.S. control. He's deployed to fly over there to express his frustration. And that line there in the journal about how these countries that Saudi Arabia is talking to, Iran and Syria, are heavily sanctioned. That's what this is about. These deals make it harder for the U.S. to isolate these countries and starve their children and deprive them of food and medicine. And that's what the Biden administration is upset about, because it deprives them of that tool of leverage. As you've written about, Richard Nephew, who works for the Biden administration, bragged about the art of sanctions, how, being able to impose sieges on these countries gives the U.S. leverage. It's the art. So what Burns is mad about is these peace deals are undermining the art of those sanctions. And I want to ask you, Max, I mean, given the fact that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are, defying U.S. orders here and are making peace with Iran and Syria, what does that mean for the think tanks, like the pro-dirty war think tanks that they fund in D.C., who've spent so much time going after us and promoting sanctions, promoting the dirty war in Syria? What does that mean for them? Do you think people like Charles Lister, who's funded by the same Gulf monarchies that are now changing their policy a little bit, does that mean that they continue in their staunch advocacy for sanctions and war, or are they going to be forced to change their position because their funders' policy is changing as well?
It's a good question. I think it'll be years before the think tanks reorient themselves. And by the way, since you brought up think tanks, I mean, the Carnegie Endowment was Bill Burns' think tank. And right when he left to be CIA director, they brought Matt Duss in. I think the think tanks are just cards that the Gulf states use to maintain their influence in Washington. They're not going away. The larger issue here is that Saudi Arabia is now able to play both sides off one another because everyone needs their oil.
Mm-hmm.
China is one of the most oil hungry countries on the planet, and they are now buying Saudi oil in the renminbi, in Chinese currency. So de-dollarization is taking place. This actually has been acknowledged by Fareed Zakaria, one of the Biden administration State Department's closest allies, on his Sunday show. And it was a very succinct, concise, and I thought honest description of what's taking place to the dollar. The petrodollar is really the basis of American empire, and we're seeing that fall away. So it makes me, as I said, it makes me rethink the Khashoggi affair. Jamal Khashoggi was said to be a CIA asset. He was a really important U.S.-backed Saudi dissident who was being leveraged against Mohammed bin Salman. He was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul under mysterious circumstances. But then you had Gina Haspel, the CIA director, running around supposedly with audio of his killing. I don't know how she got it, playing it for world leaders to get them to sanction and attack Saudi Arabia. So it's obvious the U.S. wanted Mohammed bin Salman out. And we thought maybe it's because he's becoming too independent. They certainly pushed him away from the U.S., and now they're paying the price. And I think that they sensed that he was already moving away from them, that they couldn't control him. And so Burns's visit is sort of a last-ditch attempt. And for the Saudis, I mean, as you mentioned, ending the Yemen war, finding an exit ramp on Yemen is definitely in their interest. They also have a security situation inside their own borders in the region of Qatif, which is where the Saudi Shia minority lives. Remember, Saudi Arabia executed the Shia leader, Mohammed Nimr al-Nimr, who, just grisly execution as part of a wave of executions when Mohammed bin Salman came in. And there have been riots and protests there, but a deal with Iran would certainly improve the security situation inside Saudi Arabia. So, and for Iran, well, of course, it's obvious why they would want to make peace with Saudi Arabia. If they can overcome this and China and Russia can broker it, it's one of the biggest blows to U.S. empire since the end of the Vietnam War. I can't think of anything else, along with the de-dollarization process. So the world is changing so rapidly before our eyes. And we started this live stream with Israel-Palestine. Well, the only way Palestinians are going to get out of the nightmare the long nightmare they've lived through is weakening of U.S. hegemony. They've always understood that. So this process, I think, could actually lead, perhaps, who knows, to an honest peace plan for Israel-Palestine brokered by another nation, maybe a country like China.
This year must be what? This year, I believe, is the 30th anniversary of the fake peace process, or is it 90? Is it 94? I don't remember. 93 or 94. So we've had 30 years of this scam peace process, which has just been such a disaster. and maybe we'll finally break out of its clutches. But man, what a scam that was.
Yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't just a scam. It was what laid the basis for the crisis we're living through because, I mean, the whole peace process was about hard separation of the Palestinians from Jewish Israelis. So it laid the basis for the apartheid wall through the West Bank, for sealing off Gaza, and the whole destabilization of Israeli politics. When obviously the answer is sort of equality from the river to the sea as a means of challenging Zionism. And that's what the Palestinians who opposed Oslo were advocating. That's what Palestinians who support BDS are advocating.
Yeah.
We had a question about, and thank you for that super chat. We had a question about the UAE normalizing with Syria, and when will Russia stop Israel from bombing Syria? Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in there.
Well, that's a great question. Russia lets Israel bomb Syria. If it wanted to, it could step in and stop it, but it doesn't. And that's because Russia, I'm assuming, I think they're prioritizing their relationship with Israel. I hope I said that right. Russia, if it wanted to, could stop Israel from bombing Syria. But Russia is prioritizing its relationship with Israel for whatever reasons I don't fully understand. But
one reason could be Ukraine. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is part of the theory that the Biden administration and the West were launching a color revolution by backing these liberal protests against Netanyahu, which is that Netanyahu's administration has refused to supply weapons to Ukraine or diplomatically openly support Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Why? One, because Russia is engaged in security coordination with Israel to allow it to bomb inside Syria, which makes, when I was in Syria, this was making Syrians very, very mad.
Yes.
They were furious about this. Two, there are close to 2 million, at least 1.5 million Israeli Jews from Russia inside Israel, which helped them win the demographic trench war against the Palestinians. And they have their own representatives like Avigdor Lieberman, who come out of Netanyahu's Likud party and maintain ties to Russia. Lieberman comes from Moldova, but they maintain ties to Russia. And there have been rallies in support of Russia's war effort inside Israel, like large rallies.
Yeah.
And they're not treated the same way they would be like if they happened in the US or Germany, where people would see it as this giant scandal. So that's why I think that's taking place. And Syria is just coming back into the fold because it's just a natural restoration of ties now that the dirty war is over. I think we haven't even covered the attacks on US troops in Northeast Syria, but it seems like only a matter of time before those US troops are winkled out as Syria starts to normalize with its neighbors.
Especially now that Syria is also talking to Turkey. And if a rapprochement happens there and perhaps even Turkish troops withdraw, that makes it harder for the U.S. to maintain its control of the parts of Syria that it has. And it gives the U.S. one less partner in strangulating Syria. But I'd love to see the Russian government explain why it lets Israel bomb Syria so much, because Israel's bombed Syria hundreds of times. And it's, when I was there too, I heard the same thing. People are really frustrated. I heard gratitude toward Russia because Russia stepped in to stop the spread of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but still anger that Russia lets Israel carry out these periodic bombings that terrorize Syrians pretty much every single week now. This happens.
Yeah.
Even after the earthquake, Israel's still bombing the airports of Syria, hindering the delivery of aid.
Yeah. It's one of their last cards, and they are at the same time frightened of real retaliation, which will come from Lebanon, as we said. But we'll continue following it. I've been wanting to do this segment for some weeks, and I really would like to get back to the region at some point. But we should move on to another segment closer to home that'll probably be more humorous than this one. Aaron, I don't know if you want to lead, but there's been a smear campaign targeting Matt Taibbi.
Right. So for those who've been following, we've interviewed Matt Taibbi before. We've interviewed Matt Taibbi about this. He got access to the Twitter files, which is a huge cache of internal communications at Twitter, which showed that there was a huge pressure campaign on Twitter by U.S. intelligence and U.S. intelligence front groups to censor dissenting voices, to minimize the spread of countervailing information, anything that undermined the national security state, and that Twitter was involved in this along with other social media giants instead of bowing to these pressure campaigns. So such as, for example, validating the requests of powerful people inside the U.S. government to basically censor anything that could be tied to Russia or said to be tied to Russia, and to validate Russiagate propaganda. So to limit the spread of anything that criticized Russiagate. These are among the revelations of the Twitter files. So Matt Taibbi's been, I think, doing a public service in reporting this. And among the media outlets that this embarrassed is MSNBC, because MSNBC relied on scams like Hamilton 68, which is something that, Max, you exposed a long time ago at the Grayzone, this fake dashboard of so-called Russian accounts. And this is trotted out whenever the national security state wants to discredit a line of thinking. What it will say is, oh, this is being promoted by these Russian accounts. And look, here's this dashboard, Hamilton 68, to validate that. And what the Twitter files confirmed is that this was a scam, that the so-called experts behind the Hamilton 68 had no data whatsoever to back it up. That's among the revelations that Matt Taibbi unearthed with his reporting. And this embarrassed networks like MSNBC because they were, of course, parrot all the claims put out by the Hamilton 68 dashboard and the group behind it, this front group called the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Just another one of these neocon groups with the same neocon members, right?
But the general problem that people like Mehdi Hasan, MSNBC host, the Democratic Party have with the Twitter files is the same problem that the intelligence services have with it. It's deprived them of their ability to censor social media to advance their political objectives, and particularly to censor true dissenting opinions, true information and dissenting opinions. That's what they've been doing. So that's what this is about. So should we play Mehdi Hasan's attempted takedown of Matt Taibbi?
So here's Mehdi Hasan of MSNBC, or Peacock. That's where he has a show. And here he is bragging that he brought on Matt Taibbi. And Mehdi says, watch me confront Matt Taibbi with multiple unacknowledged and glaring mistakes in his Twitter files reporting. So Mehdi is claiming that he caught Matt in what he calls, quote, multiple unacknowledged and glaring mistakes. You watch the actual interview, and the things that Mehdi confronts Matt on are ridiculously trivial, such as catching Matt getting literally an acronym wrong. Okay, so let's watch that clip.
You talk a lot about the Election Integrity Project in the Twitter files, which Stanford and the University of Washington founded to monitor attacks on our elections.
Both backed by U.S. intelligence.
And you say some stuff about them that a lot of your critics say is not true, and that affects your credibility. You said the EIP was founded in response to the government dropping its proposal for a disinformation governance. Well, there you are. We're quoting you on screen. It wasn't. It was formed 2 years earlier. You suggest it was government funded, even though during the 2020 election that you're covering, it wasn't. You say they labeled 22 million tweets as misinformation in the run-up to the 2020 vote. They didn't. They flagged 3,000 election misinformation tweets for labeling, so you were only 21,997,000 off. And you also claim the EIP was, let me finish the question, you can come back in. You also claim the EIP was partnered with the government Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, to censor Twitter, but you mix up CISA, CISA, a Homeland Security Agency, with the Center for Internet Security, the CIS, which is a nonprofit. In fact, you added an A to CIS,
which is a nonprofit backed by state entities.
I think people can see it there in brackets to make that false claim. It's just error after error, Matt, on just this one topic.
Error. But the other ones aren't.
No.
The 22 million number came from their own report.
Yeah, where did it came from? A report in March. Do you know what the 22 million number is, Matt? Can you tell me? Because we checked. 22 million is the number of tweets about election misinformation that they just mapped. How many tweets were they? The ones they actually flagged to Twitter before.
Wait, isn't that flagging?
Yeah, that is flagging. It's a thing. So Mehdi is asserting that Matt has made errors that aren't actually errors. The 22 million thing about those tweets being flagged, that was correct. Matt showed that on Twitter afterwards. Mehdi, of course, still hasn't retracted his false claim. And then look at him getting indignant over Matt getting an acronym wrong. He said you added an A. You had an A. But the thing is, as Li Fong pointed out, actually, that group CISA is actually a DHS agency, and it was actually partnered with whatever the other group was. So Mehdi is being sanctimonious over things that at best are minor errors. And in fact, in some cases here aren't even actually errors. Like the 22 million figure that Matt reported was correct.
Yeah. And I mean, even if they were errors, they're picayune details in the larger factual narrative about U.S. intelligence creating these cutouts and proxies to censor social media, which should be what the debate is about. And Mehdi's putting on this performance in order to convince his Blue Anon viewers that somehow the whole thing was built on a foundation of lies. Taibbi's whole presentation was lies.
So you were off by 21,997,000. That's another error.
They said a lot of things. I stand by my story.
You stand by what story? You stand by 22 million were flagged in the run-up to the election, even though that number came in March 2021, which was after the election.
No, this came in their report after the election.
Exactly.
Which was about some total of tweets that they counted on the election.
The problem is Matt's too much of a straight shooter, and I don't know if he's not made for like the obnoxious world of the cable scream fest. So he's just kind of thinking and kind of being cerebral. And the only way to take on Mehdi is to just meet him with just straight up nuclear blitzkrieg and accuse him of lying. And I would have gone in with a different posture, but Matt's response in writing at his Substack is excellent. Everyone should read it. Just about all the lies MSNBC's told.
Yeah. Matt's only problem here is that he's expecting a good faith discussion.
Yeah.
But Mehdi doesn't care about a good faith discussion. He's trying to perform for his Blue Anon audience, and he wants to take revenge on Matt Taibbi for embarrassing the Russiagate narrative and the network like his that promoted it. That's what this is all about, and trying to discredit him by focusing on these irrelevant errors that, in fact, in some cases aren't even errors. And Matt keeps trying to have a good faith discussion, which is just not even possible here within these confines. But eventually, Matt did get frustrated, and so he did finally.
Should we just go to it?
Yeah.
To Twitter was 2,980 tweets, I believe. So that's nowhere near 22 million. Come on, what? You got something wrong. You got CISA wrong. Why did you add A? Okay, Matt, why did you add A in square brackets? Do you understand why people worry about?
I actually thought that.
And why didn't you fix it? I just checked the tweet before I came on air. It's been 3 weeks since it was flagged to you. Why not fix it? Do you not have editors at the racket?
I didn't realize that until now.
Okay, and what about the date? You got the date wrong when it was found. You said it was founded in response to the disinformation board. That was last year.
Well, because Stamos is saying in the video that we were sort of created to fill the gaps.
No, that's not what you say in the tweet. That's not what you say in the tweet.
SIO was created in 2018.
No. You say, this is what you say, that the EIP was created after the public uproar caused the disinformation board. That's wrong. You need to correct.
All right. So here's another clip where Matt reminds Mehdi that MSNBC pushed a straight up, an actual error, which is a straight up lie, which is that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation.
To leave it there, Matt. Thank you for appearing on the show.
What about the Hunter Biden story?
Appreciate it. I don't think I've ever written about the Hunter Biden story, so maybe you should apologize to me for putting words in my mouth. You said at the beginning I put words. I never said a word about the Hunter Biden story, but we will be right back.
What? So that was it.
So actually, so Mehdi's actually not telling the truth there, because he has said stuff about the Hunter Biden laptop story, which I will show. But look, actually, let's say for a second that was correct, that he said that he's never said a word about the Hunter Biden laptop story. He'd be admitting then to staying silent on a massive scam that was used to justify censorship on factual reporting of a major presidential candidate, because the lie that was told to justify censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story in the New York Post was that this came from Russia. So if Mehdi is claiming here falsely, but let's take it at face value for a second, that he said nothing about that, that's even worse, because that means he's staying silent on a blatant scam that justified censorship. But for him to claim that he never said a word about it is not true, because here he is saying a word about it, at least on Twitter. This is him in December 2000, recently, saying, a reminder that both the Murdoch-owned Fox and Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal turned down the Hunter Biden laptop story, and the reporter who wrote the story for the Murdoch-owned New York Post wouldn't put their name on it. But sure, it was a liberal media conspiracy to suppress it. So that is him justifying the censorship of the story and contradicting the lie he just told, which that he never said a word about the story. He is right there. And there are other examples of that too. Here he is back when it was happening in October 2020. He says, even if every word of the New York Post reporting, he puts reporting in quotation marks, on Hunter Biden is true, every word of it, it still wouldn't equate to 1% of the corruption stories involving Trump. He's trying to basically justify ignoring it. So he can't even pick his narrative. It's either not important or he's saying he didn't even talk about it. And of course, we know he's lying about that because he did talk about it, as he's doing there. So he couldn't even keep his lies straight. But honestly, the lie is even worse, because why would you brag about saying nothing on censorship? And the fact that Matt Taibbi is someone who did say something has made him a target of people like Mehdi, who can't handle the reporting he does. And that's why this interview, they don't even talk about the actual substance of the Twitter files. It's just these gotcha attempts. It's one gotcha attempt after another. Let me show you just one more clip, because I think this was Matt's best point, and it's very concise. So again, where are they having this discussion? They're having this discussion on MSNBC, the receptacle for every single Russiagate lie of the last 6 years, that Trump is a Russian agent, that Michael Cohen went to Prague to conspire with hackers, that Paul Manafort passed secret polling data to a Russian spy who gave that to Vladimir Putin for Russia's massive social media operation that brainwashed millions of Americans into voting for Trump and not Hillary. That, according to Rachel Maddow, that Putin was going to use the P-tape to blackmail Trump to into withdrawing U.S. forces from Europe. Okay, these are all the deranged conspiracy theories, some of them that MSNBC pushed for years. And so Matt invoked that as Mehdi was trying to scold Mehdi, and MSNBC hosts were trying to scold Matt about journalistic ethics.
Your own words, Matt. You crossed that line, and Musk
First
has
of all,
you. Those are your words.
The hilarity of this coming from MSNBC, which did nothing but vomit up fake Russiagate stories that came straight from the FBI for 6 consecutive years. I apologize for. I'm going to apologize for.
Great. I wasn't there in that period, so I've got nothing to apologize.
Oh, right. And I love it. He always interrupts.
Words.
That's his whole style.
Yeah, and of course, that's his excuse. I wasn't there in that period. So here he is trying to hold Matt to account, because he's mad at Matt for not criticizing Elon Musk, and he's trying to hold him to account for these minor errors that have zero consequence, even if they were errors, which in some cases they weren't. And yet, so Matt points out that Mehdi's working for a network that broadcast serious propaganda and laughable propaganda for 6 years. And Mehdi's only answer is, oh, I wasn't there during that period. But of course, that's right. Mehdi wasn't there during that period. What was he doing during that period? He was pandering to Russiagate from the purchase of The Intercept so he could get hired at MSNBC, where he's now continued in the Russiagating tradition, as exemplified by him going after a journalist who dared challenge it.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a rich history that explains how Mehdi Hasan got to where he is. And this is really it. It's bootlicking after arriving from the UK, where he couldn't quite reach the heights that he wanted to in Washington. And it's kind of impressive in a way, if you're completely cynical and Machiavellian like Mehdi is, and absolutely opportunistic. It's kind of impressive how he just showed up in Washington with an Al Jazeera job and worked his way in as an MSNBC host by just relentless bootlicking and serving the Blue Anon establishment, which really is the hegemonic political force in the United States right now, and has substantial control over the domestic security services, corporate boardrooms, etc.
It definitely is impressive. He definitely worked very hard to get where he is, with nonstop kissing ass to MSNBC platitudes, to Russiagate, to bashing people who are on the actual left. It is impressive that he was able to get where he was coming over from Britain. He definitely deserves the perch he's in. He's worked very hard for it. You have to give him that. But it requires him to be constantly dishonest and disingenuous, as this interview with Taibbi exemplifies. He's bragging about catching him on these inconsequential errors. And who is this going to convince beyond the Blue Anon crowd? I mean, if you watch the interview, he interrupts Matt constantly. He's getting him on these minor things, these minor errors. And then when Matt calls out the actual consequential propaganda that MSNBC pushed, Mehdi has nothing to say about it. I wasn't there during that period. I haven't said anything about Hunter Biden laptop, which of course is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he never will challenge power in any meaningful way. He'll only challenge power if it's Republican power, right-wing Republican power. I mean, he even shines the shoes of the uniparty Republicans as long as they're anti-Trump. Like, he'll be, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he had Liz Cheney on at some point to praise her. But, you know, he loves NATO. He loves the new Cold War. But where did Mehdi come from? I mean, how do you go from, he was in DC not too long ago at Politics and Prose, the main kind of liberal political bookstore here that hosts book talks. And who was his host and interlocutor when he was on stage there for a packed room? It was former White House press secretary Jen Psaki. So that's where Mehdi has found himself. But where does he come from? He comes from a very weird background where not too long ago, he was actually trying to ingratiate himself with religious fundamentalists and bashing many of the concepts that define MSNBC viewers. Here's Mehdi as a hate preacher at a London mosque, attacking non-Muslims.
Islam, to believe is to know.
And he was like at the New Statesman at the time.
That is what it fundamentally comes down to. It is to remain ignorant, to cover up knowledge. After all, what is kafir? Kafir comes from the root word, which means to cover up, to conceal. The kafir is the one who covers up that knowledge which is clear. The French Orientalist scholar Lamens, he once wrote that the Quran is not far from considering unbelief, disbelief, as an infirmity, as an illness, as a disease of the human mind. SubhanAllah. Non-Muslims point this out to us.
I mean, he's talking about MSNBC viewers.
The atheists who remain deaf and stubborn to the teachings of Islam, the rational message of the Quran, they are described in the Quran as, quote, a people of no intelligence. Allah describes them. Not of no morality, not of no belief, a people of no intelligence. Because they are incapable of the intellectual effort it requires to shake off those blind prejudices.
He's calling all non-Muslims cattle in a public speech. This is an MSNBC host.
To shake off those easy assumptions about this world, about the existence of God. In this respect, the Quran describes the atheists as cattle. As cattle, as those who go with the crowd and do not stop and wonder about this world. Ulama unanimously agree.
That's him, the same guy who chewed out Matt Taibbi. This is him.
That at the very minimum, if Yazid was not a kafir, then at the
Yazid is like the evil satanic figure of Shia Islam.
minimum, he was a fasir, a transgressor, a breaker of Islamic laws, a corrupt individual, a tyrant, a killer, a drunkard, a dog lover, a music lover, a homosexual, a pedophile, a sexual deviant, someone who slept with his own mother.
Let's hear that again.
Unanimously agree that at the very minimum, if Yazid was not a kafir, then at the very minimum, he was a fasir, a transgressor, a breaker of Islamic laws, a corrupt individual, a tyrant, a killer, a drunkard, a dog lover.
Wait a minute. MSNBC watchers love dogs. Mehdi is saying that Satan is a dog lover. And if you're a dog lover, you're satanic. I mean, they love walking their golden retrievers around to their dog parks and stuff.
A music lover.
Wait, Satan's a music lover. What's wrong with music, Mehdi? I guess Mehdi doesn't like put his iPods in and listen to some like Coldplay or something before he's like going to dress down Taibbi.
A homosexual.
Whoa, a homosexual? Satan is homosexuality satanic?
Pedophile, a sexual deviant, someone who slept with his own mother. Astaghfirullah. These are their views.
Astaghfirullah, he slept with his own mother. Oh, how do you go from that to being like one of the favorite figures on MSNBC Peacock for like Blue Anon golden retriever dog walkers and people who have like the LGBT flag on their homes? Like, how do you do that unless you were like the most aggressive, shameless opportunist on the planet? And I should note, Mehdi did apologize for saying homosexuality is satanic on his lobbying campaign to be an MSNBC host, but he never apologized for saying loving dogs is satanic or that loving music is satanic. I mean, if you love John Coltrane, you are a Satan worshiper, according to that speech. I think he should apologize to music lovers.
And then after that, there's that time when he gets caught writing this cover letter to the Daily Mail, this right-wing rag in the UK, begging for a columnist job, where he talks about how much he loves their, he offers to criticize the left from the left, to basically be like the progressive traitor who will attack the left from the left. And he talks about how he admires the Daily Mail's conservative stances on family values, including abortion. So even after he shed the hate preacher thing, he still carried that sort of reactionary tradition over in an attempt to get a job at the Daily Mail.
And this is a lot of what he did when he was at The Intercept, which is like to attack the anti-imperialist left from the left.
Yeah.
But so this is when he was trying to make his way back in 2009 in the UK, and he writes to the opinion editor of the Daily Mail, like offering himself up, offering his services. My name is Mehdi Hassan, and I'm the Daily Statesman senior political editor. And he said, Peter Oborn suggested I drop you a line because I'm keen to write for the Daily Mail. Although I'm on the left of the political spectrum and I disagree with the Mail's editorial line on a range of issues, I've always admired the paper's passion, rigor, boldness, blah, blah, blah. I'm basically sucking up to you. Vitally important role in the national debate, blah, blah. He praises their outspoken defense of faith and Christian culture in the face of attacks from militant atheists and secularists, aka MSNBC watchers. And I am not a labor tribalist. I'm ultra critical of the left. Okay.
Yes.
Especially on social and moral issues.
Yes.
Where my fellow leftists and liberals have lost touch with their own traditions and the great British public. So he's a social traditionalist, social conservative. So he says that I could therefore write pieces for the Mail critical of labor and the left from inside labor and the left, basically as the left traitor writing for a Murdoch publication. That's how he was positioning himself. And here's the real icing on the cake. I am also attracted by the Mail's social conservatism on issues like marriage, the family, abortion, and teen pregnancies. I'd like to write a piece for the Mail making the left-wing case against abortion. I think he should write it for MSNBC.com, and also why gay men should not be allowed to have civil marriage rights in the United States. Yeah. By the way, you're not even an American. What are you doing telling us what to do with your British accent? Like, I thought we kicked the British out of here, Mehdi.
Well, honestly, Max, my conspiracy theory has always been that the powers that be, who are really trying to discredit the actual left, see this annoying British guy who's so cocky, so full of himself, but yet constantly proclaims himself to be the representative of the left. So in their bid to undermine the real left, they put him forward. They give him an MSNBC show. They give him a column at The Intercept to say, look, this is what this is what the face of leftism is. This snobby, cocky, Oxford educated Brit. That's what the left is. And accordingly, anybody who could possibly be attracted to the left will be repelled by what they see. That's my conspiracy theory about who Mehdi really serves, aside from himself.
I guess I think what he does is he plays off of diversity politics to appear as left wing, but he's not very left wing, and he's just seeking to serve one side of the establishment without the same erudition as Fareed Zakaria, another kind of brown guy of immigrant background who came to Washington to achieve success in a city that is in a political system that's generally hostile to people that look like that and have that background.
And the one redeeming thing you can say about Mehdi is that at least on his Peacock, whatever it is show, sometimes he will actually do a decent segment about Palestine. He'll actually represent Palestinian voices. He'll criticize Israel. But look how quickly, when he needs to, he will throw them under the bus. So there was this incident where some Palestinian lawmakers inside the Israeli Knesset boycotted the speech by Zelensky in protest of the proxy war. And here's Mehdi coming out to throw them under the bus. Deeply disappointing to see the Palestinian parties in the Knesset boycott Zelensky's speech and blame NATO and not Putin for imposing this war in Ukraine. No excuse for this kind of awful behavior.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about his defense, it's not really a defense of Palestinians. It's more lamentation of the human rights abuses of defenseless Palestinians who are stateless and don't have the means to defend themselves. But once Palestinians actually show that they see their path forward as part of a multipolar world or an anti-imperialist alignment, by working with other states that aren't aligned with the US, he opposes that. So he opposes any real geopolitical or political path forward for Palestinians. And then he constantly attacks the states that could deliver Palestinians a way out. He's obsessed with hating China and Russia, obviously. And that's just kind of the line you can take in liberal Washington right now. I mean, most Democrats, according to a Gallup poll, it was a Gallup poll taken in March of last month. Most Democrats, for the first time, sympathize more with Palestinians than Israel. And so it's permissible to do what he does, which is, they're getting beaten. They're getting shot. But once you counter US attacks on actual states like Syria, you've crossed the red line. Actual states that have historically defended Palestine or Iran, then you've crossed the line, and he never will cross that line. In fact, he's on the other side. And so on an objective basis, he actually obstructs the Palestinian battle for freedom. And he puts himself forward as some kind of expert on it when he's not even a Palestinian.
Well, speaking of shameless opportunists, here's how AOC greeted the interview with Matt Taibbi, where she basically took it as because again, Mehdi claimed that he caught Matt in a bunch of errors that in fact were in reality minor errors, and in another case, not even an error at all. AOC took the occasion to basically say that Matt's reporting should be canceled. So here she says, if you can read this also implicates House Republicans as well, who launched an entire oversight hearing and investigation based on these errors. Did House Oversight not fact check or double verify any of these claims or read the report cited before wasting tons of public time and dollars on it? So basically, House Republicans held a committee where Matt Taibbi was a witness, and he talked about in it the abuses of the intelligence community as revealed in the Twitter files. And by the way, Matt, as we played the clip when we covered this, Matt didn't just talk about right-wing voices being silenced. He also talked about left-wing voices like Consortium News and Telesur being silenced. And so now AOC is saying that these minor errors, like about an acronym and a date that Mehdi got mad on, that somehow discredits the entire enterprise. She says this implicates House Republicans as well. by association, then she means that Matt Taibbi's reporting is implicated as well, and it shouldn't be taken seriously. So that's how AOC is responding to this.
Yeah, I mean, which is a de facto endorsement of state censorship of dissenting opinions on social media.
Yes,
that's what this is about.
Yep.
She's just staking out her position here, that she's on the side of the Democratic establishment and the intelligence apparatus that created this whole censorship industrial complex. And in the past, real progressives like Danny Schechter, Robert McChesney, they were advocating media reform. They were and representing a similar constituency as AOC, which meant more diversity of voices in media, less consolidation of corporate media organizations, bringing back the fairness doctrine to allow a wider array of opinions, more public support for media, less corporate support, that kind of thing. What AOC has done ever since entering Congress is support this, and it's all been handed to her, support a war on disinformation and ask her own followers to report people who criticize her to Twitter and Facebook, which led to this. I mean, it accused Jimmy Dore of violence for Force the Vote. One person who criticized her, we reported on it at the Grayzone, had cops show up at his house in the LA area. AOC denied having any role in that, but she is obsessed with controlling social media, and she thinks somehow that the state is her ally in this. Whereas what Taibbi and others who've been reporting the Twitter files have done is show the state's dishonest, sinister hand in censoring truthful information that contravenes the objectives of the political establishment.
Yeah. Reminds me of that congressman, I forgot his name, Colin Allred or something, who, when Matt appeared before Congress, he lectured Matt about how, the people policing social media are just regular folks teaming up with the CIA to help protect all of us. That's like the fantasy world that these people live in, that really all the censorship is somehow done for our benefit. And it's just regular folks doing it, not spooks who want to cover up, propaganda and crimes that they commit.
Yeah. And as I said, like AOC, she's on a small scale. She does personally what the state was doing around, throughout Russiagate, which the Twitter files exposed. Here's a letter she sent out to her followers, like in 2021. Right-wing operatives with millions of followers on social media are spreading flat-out lies and misleading information about Alexandria. But with your help, we can force Twitter and Facebook to take action and enforce their own rules. And so she asks her followers to report anyone who's spreading quote-unquote disinformation about Alexandria to the censors. So what were they doing and saying? Well, a lot of this had to do with Michael Tracy, who questioned her phony, tearful performance about January 6th. And they were questioning what she actually was doing on January 6th and whether her life was actually in danger. In fact, she had already been evacuated through the tunnels out of the Capitol and was in a secure location when she did this performance about how she heard a voice at her door and someone said, "Is she in there? Is she in there?" But it wasn't even a right-wing rioter. It was a Capitol police officer there to protect her. So people started questioning her. And then she asks her followers to report them all to the censors, to the principal. And what Taibbi's doing, he's taking the principal away. He's exposing the principal as a dishonest broker. So she can't have that. She's a little snitch who appeals to authority to advance her goals and protect herself from legitimate criticism over the deceptions that she deploys. Yeah. So, this is a war on journalism. It's a war on real journalism by phony opportunists like Mehdi Hasan and snitches, little teachers' pets like AOC. And so we need to stand with the real journalists here who are exposing abuse of state power as journalists should do. That's just classic journalism.
Yeah, and that was a question I think Matt asked Mehdi during the segment. He said, like, are you saying that this reporting is not in the public interest? And I don't think Mehdi answered that question, because anybody who's ever asked that question can't give a straight, who's been trying to insult Matt, can't answer it, because everyone knows that this is in the public interest. How is it not in the public interest to expose that social media companies are censoring facts and censoring accounts at the behest of the national security state and other powerful actors? Like, that is in the public interest. Nobody who can call themselves a journalist can deny that. So you have to come up with all these other ways to try to discredit the reporting that Matt has done, including in this case by focusing on completely trivial matters, such as whether or not Matt got an acronym right. Like, I'll never that quote of Mehdi's, like, you literally inserted an A. You inserted an A in brackets. Like,
it's not CISA, it's CSA, which is a non-profit. Although CISA is involved somehow.
Yeah, exactly. CISA is actually. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to, you see AOC and others boosting Mehdi. I would love to ask them, just impromptu, just as they turn the corner, hey, what did Matt Taibbi get wrong? Can you tell me? They wouldn't be able to remember what it was. Of course.
Yeah.
But exactly. She's saying that the entire hearing on the Twitter files was illegitimate because of what Mehdi supposedly exposed.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think
one quick thing before we go, just one last little news bite, which I think is significant, and it relates to this conversation because, it is in the public interest to know all this, but there are elements of the state that don't believe the public should know everything. That's why directives were handed out, as we saw through the Twitter files, to censor or suppress tweets that they acknowledged were true about injuries related to the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine, that it would cause vaccine hesitancy if people talked about getting injured on Twitter by this vaccine. And one of the biggest critics of the mandates and that whole regime that we lived through is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's declared his intention to run for president. And, he's being attacked, as can be expected. He's going to run as a Democrat. I don't know how far his campaign is going yet, whether it's still in an exploratory phase. I mean, I guess he's a presidential candidate. I don't know if he'll be allowed in the debates. I think we're going to see how undemocratic the Democratic Party is. But if you look at any headline about him, they just say that he is an anti-vaccine crackpot or anti-vaccine advocate. That's how he's being described. He was right about the failings of the COVID-19, the mRNA vaccines from the beginning, before they were even rolled out in late 2020. He was saying they will not prevent transmission or infection. And he was attacked for that. And he proved right, because what he was saying was it won't stop the pandemic, as we're being told, as Rachel Maddow said. And it won't, it will lead to a bunch of asymptomatic or symptomatic carriers walking around thinking that they're fine and spreading it to others. So it's not going to work. But there is another side to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the son of someone who was assassinated in a political assassination that he believes is unsolved. The son of someone who was monitored and undermined by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, as the son of someone who attempted to stop the Vietnam War, and as someone who is also a prominent environmental lawyer taking on corporate America, and who has very strong opinions against or about the evils of the U.S. war state, the CIA, and the FBI, and who's hosted me on his podcast to talk about the Ukraine proxy war. And here's a statement, one of the first statements that RFK Jr. made as a Democratic presidential candidate. I just wanted to alert everyone that this is happening. And here's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The collapse of U.S. influence over Saudi Arabia and the kingdom's new alliances with China and Iran are painful emblems of the abject failure of the neocon strategy of maintaining U.S. global hegemony with aggressive projections of military power. China has displaced the American empire by deftly projecting instead economic power. Over the past decade, our country has spent trillions bombing roads, bridges, ports, and airports. China spent the equivalent building the same across the developing world. The Ukraine war is the final collapse of the neocons' short-lived American century. The neocon projects in Iraq and Ukraine have cost $8.1 trillion, hollowed out our middle class, made a laughingstock of U.S. military power and moral authority, pushed China and Russia into an invincible alliance, destroyed the dollar as the global currency, cost millions of lives, and done nothing to advance democracy or win friendships or influence. So this is someone who is going to attempt to be on the Democratic debate platform. And I think at this point, I'm calling it a welcome intervention, and I'm looking forward to speaking to Bobby Kennedy Jr. on this platform at some point in the near future. So,
well, that'll do him wonders for the Democratic primary crowd to have him featured on the Grayzone. He's gonna,
well, it's about time we had someone who just doesn't care about what the Democratic Party brokers think and relates to the base, because there still is a part of the Democratic Party base that hates MSNBC and all the pro-war trash they're pushing out. That hasn't completely gone over. And as we saw with Jeremy Corbyn's Labor candidacy, not comparing RFK to Corbyn, but I'm just speaking about a potential political phenomenon. He pulled tens and tens of thousands of mostly young people into the Labor Party who had been disgusted by Tony Blair and New Labor. So I hope that the Democratic Party, through RFK's candidacy, can become an arena of contestation as it was when Bernie in 2016 declared. And it seems like RFK is taking a much better line than Bernie did over U.S. empire.
Pretty low bar.
Yeah, the bar's low. Anyway, we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democratic Party is the pro-war party right now, and someone needs to disrupt that.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your interview. So should we wrap it up there, Max? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think we had our say. Anything you want to announce or say before we go?
Well, just, today is the 5th anniversary of the staged incident in Duma. And I know there are some people out there who...
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I know there are people out there who know more about Duma than they've revealed publicly. And so maybe we'll get more answers soon about what actually happened. It's amazing this cover-up is still playing out in public and people are still trying to suppress it when the cover-up at the OPCW now is so extensively documented. We've covered a lot at the Grayzone. I have more coming out on that soon. And I know there are people out there who know more about it. And maybe we'll hear from them soon. One person, for example, who could speak out if he wanted to, is Riyam Dalati, who's a journalist at the BBC. He did an investigation months long, talking to people involved, and he says he can prove without a doubt that the hospital scene inside Duma, where the White Helmets released videos of them hosing down civilians and claiming that this was a chemical attack, Dalati says he can prove without a doubt that that was staged. And when you have one incident that is staged, that obviously raises questions about, all right, well, what else was staged? And what are the odds that there actually was a chemical attack inside Duma, but yet for some reason the White Helmets decided to stage a hospital scene just to make sure people really believed it? So Riyam Dalati has never released his findings about what happened. He just said he can prove it. So I hope he changes his mind, and I hope he releases his findings. And I hope other people who have more information can speak out, because fundamentally this is about dozens of people whose bodies were filmed in a staged incident, in an incident that was framed on the Syrian government, and that it's had all kinds of consequences, not just airstrikes on Syria at the time, but now when the U.S. justifies imposing its medieval sanctions on Syria, it will say things such as, well, we have to because Syria uses chemical weapons against its own people. So it's important to not just account for the initial crime in Duma, however those people were killed, but also to stop further crimes through sanctions and war, that the truth be revealed. So anyway, we'll do what we can at the Grayzone. We'll have more on that soon. And interesting new piece up at the Grayzone too, Max, about these leaked documents exposing U.S. NATO Ukraine war plans. And
check out Alex Rubinstein's new piece. I mean, we put out what we think are the classified Pentagon files. They contain a lot of interesting information, including casualty counts that seem to be pretty inconvenient to the war's planners. We also have a piece about, we have an interesting piece coming. I'll just quickly preview it. Basically, we got a call, or Alex got a message from the National Endowment for Democracy's communications director because of the piece he published on Bellingcat's Russia director justifying the terrorist attack on a cafe in St. Petersburg. And he referred to the NED, which funds Bellingcat, as a CIA cutout. And so she was upset about that. They're upset at the NED about us constantly linking them to the CIA. So we had a long talk with her, Alex and I, lasted almost an hour, and we'll be reporting on that. It was pretty revealing about the regime change arm of the US government. And so like these stories, they snowball into other stories. One question I put to her was, why does the NED fund, this US government organization, fund people who defend terrorism and also who participate in violence in the streets? And she didn't have an answer, so I'm waiting for a follow-up to that. But that should be on the site. I have a follow-up to the ICC piece we published on the Putin arrest warrant coming.
Oh yeah, by the way, so last week I said I'm looking forward to any challenge anybody has to that piece. Has anyone written a response, Max, to the reporting you did? And has the author of the Yale study, who Jeremy Lafredo interviewed, has he responded at all to the reporting you guys did, basically showing that that this study from Yale, funded by the State Department, that was the basis apparently for the ICC warrant against Putin when it comes to these child kidnapping allegations, that the study itself, the Yale study, contradicted itself, and that the study author admitted all these things to the Grayzone that undermined all the public claims that were made about his study?
Well, of course not. We've received no critical response to that. The author of this State Department sponsored Yale study that inspired the ICC's Putin arrest warrant, who even told Jeremy, basically referred to working directly with the US UN delegation and all these other intelligence elements. He has not responded at all to it. I'm going to have to engage him more directly because we would like to get him on here to respond, Nathaniel Raymond. But it's likely not going to happen. And the whole thing's such an obvious joke that when Russia's UN delegation decided to respond to the ICC's allegations, the British delegation blocked the UN broadcast. So they had to broadcast it separately on their own YouTube channel. I mean, they're just trying to cover up what they're saying instead of responding to it, because to me, it's just such a sham, what they're being accused of. Again, they're not being accused of doing any atrocities on the battlefield. They're being accused of evacuating children from a war zone who are ethnically Russian and whose families generally provide consent to do so. So anyway, a lot to pick up on next week. We'll be back next Friday. We're on Pacifica in LA and New York, Sunday at 6 p.m. on WBAI in New York, and Tuesday at 5 p.m. KPFK 90.7 in Los Angeles, and some other affiliates out there and somewhere in the country. And yeah, we'll have a lot more coming. So thanks for being with us. Thanks for all your support. Couldn't do it without you. And thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. See you next week, everybody.
Peace.
Bye, guys.